I was watching this show on TV called Around the World in 80 Faiths, which is pretty good really. It's a kind of, I guess, a documentary travel show where this chap was going around the world spending 3 or 4 minutes looking at different religious traditions. It was a bit irritating because the guy who was doing it, who was a Protestant priest, was trying a bit too hard to be kind of cool really. But yeah, there's some interesting things about it. One of the things that was really evident about it was how important origins were for a lot of these people, and how important history was, and how these religious stories kind of captured their history in some way and made it significant for them. I mean, they were completely spurious. You know, there was one guy, for example, who was talking about how he had he knew the 120 generations which separated him from Adam. You know, it's just rubbish really, but it was clearly very important to these people that they had this historical connection, which they spiritualized and did various things with, but it's the history of it, I guess, which was important. And I think that's something that James Carse talks about in one of his books, the religious case against belief, where he's basically just saying that although religions are, you know, they're kind of belief systems and political systems and all those kind of things, he says one of the things they really are histories. And the successful religions are the ones that's been around a long time, not necessarily the ones that are true or functional, or, you know, none of those kind of things matter in James Carse's analysis. He said it's just sheer endurance and the longevity of a religion which gives it its authority. And I think that's a lot of truth in that really. I mean, certainly from what these people were saying on this documentary, this sense of a felt connection to history, albeit you know, given all the trappings of religion, was really, really important to them, and their place in that story. You know what I mean? It's almost as if they were dragging a tail behind them, but they needed to know that their tail was attached. That's kind of how it felt, really. Yeah, I suppose I'm just thinking about how unfortunate it is, but possibly also fortunate, that those stories are incorrect, and how much different it would be if the story was correct. Because we don't know the exact details of our histories, our individual histories or our kind of tribal histories, but we have a lot of information about the history of the human race, and it's a difficult history, it's a problematic history, but it's a very interesting history, a much better one in many ways. I was watching this show on again, I think it's a Discovery Channel documentary a couple of years ago about the kind of out of Africa stories of how Homo sapiens came to dominate the planet, and that was really fascinating. And it was a brilliant story, actually. It was a brilliant story, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant story in many ways. It wasn't just a story of success and survival and redemption and escape, and you know, it wasn't and being chosen and being and prophecies being fulfilled. It wasn't that kind of a story, but it was a story which had some kind of strength and scale to it, I thought, and some great detail, you know, quite honestly, and one which I wouldn't have it as part of a religion, but it would certainly be great to have more information about it, to put your, you know, if you had to drag this historical tale around with us as part of our kind of psychological well-being, which was maybe one way of looking at it, then it would be good if the tale was at least you know, real, you know what I mean, not wrapped around false premises really. I mean, certainly the documentary that I saw a couple of years back, as I say, it was this out of Africa thing, but it was fantastic. You know, it's about this tribe who leave Africa and head north, and they go around the eastern side of the Mediterranean to about where Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, that kind of place is now. And then it told the story of them dividing. So some would head off right and go across what's now Asia to what's now the Bering Straits, but which is a land bridge then across to what's now the Bering Straits into North America, and then basically populating the Americas, some going all the way down to South America and some heading east to the eastern seaboard, and of course became the Native Americans. And then the other group coming out of Africa, again heading up as far as Kazakhstan, let's say. But instead of turning right, these guys turned left and populated Europe eventually. And that's a fantastic story. And that whole 1492 part of that story is great as well, you know, because 1492, when Columbus or the Welsh or whoever it was first sailed across, the Vikings first sailed across for the Atlantic, you know, that's the coming together of two branches of the family after, you know, 100,000 years or whatever, well 40,000 years certainly. You know, the ones who've gone right at Kazakhstan and the ones who turned left coming together in 1492. I mean, it's slightly unfortunate what happened beyond that, you know what I mean, where one half of the family effectively suppressed the other half, but the idea is cool, you know, and that's a great story. I think that's the stuff of myth and legend in a much more interesting way, and in many ways it's a better cautionary tale in terms of what we are capable of than a lot of the stuff you find in fiction and mythology. The other bit of that story, actually, which I quite like, or the other related story, is again the Out of Africa story, which is, and I can't remember where I read this bit, but there's been a number of diasporas from Africa that were apparently 100,000 years ago or whatever, and a bit longer than that actually. But before our ancestors, Homo sapiens, escaped from Africa, there were an earlier group presumably moved north and again colonised Europe, and that was what we call now Homo neanderthalis, the Neanderthals, so it's said. And so the Neanderthals distributed themselves across northern Europe for probably 60 or 70,000 years before this second group I've just been talking about came north. So when these guys went north and turned left at Kazakhstan, they weren't just meeting, you know, the native animals, the native flora and fauna. They were also meeting another Homo species, the Homo neanderthalis. And there's a number of different accounts of what might have happened at that point. There are some accounts which say that, you know, Homo neanderthalis and Homo sapiens kind of interbred, which may be the case, I don't know. But a more likely story, and the one that I've read about quite a bit about, is that basically Homo sapiens outcompeted their older cousins, the Homo neanderthalis, and either killed them in conflict, or Homo neanderthalis just kind of retreated progressively west, away from the advance of Homo sapiens moving across Europe, occupying less and less of Europe until Homo sapiens gets right the way across. There's really like poignant moment in this. Actually, I did see a documentary about this. Yeah, there's a really poignant moment in this documentary I saw about this bit of the gradual moving away of Homo neanderthalis, which was that the most recent archaeological find of Homo neanderthalis, the Neanderthals, is right on the coast of northern France, right on the coast, and it's things like grave goods and beads, that kind of stuff, and some food traces. So you get the impression of this last little tiny community of Neanderthals, just perched right on the western edge of Europe with nowhere else to run to, basically. Having been pursued and having their land having been outcompeted all the way across Europe, until just this last little family group probably just clumped on the edge of, right on the edge of Western Europe, before eventually being effectively pushed into the sea and Homo sapiens taking over. And again, I think it's not a very pleasant story, because we were the victors in that, and we effectively wiped out our nearest relative, the only other member of the Homo genus, is it, left. But again, I think it's a really fantastic story in terms of its instructive quality, and in terms of its moral quality, in terms of what it says. It's another great cautionary tale, which I think it just whoops the ass of religious and mythological stories personally, and it has the benefit of probably being true as well. So if I was going to drag a historical tale around with me in the form of some kind of historical story, I would much prefer to have these Out of Africa stories, including the unpleasant bits of 1492 and the unpleasant bits of wiping out Neanderthalis. I'd much rather have those than the myths of religions.